Stan, how are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm good. It's nice to meet you. How's
So
everything
you
been coming
actually
along?
real?
Yes, I'm actually real. I'm actually interacting with you right now. This is not just a pre-recorded video, Stan.
Okay, so it's not a myth. You are real.
I'm real, yes.
Okay, all right. So I'm ready.
Awesome. So, what's the biggest challenge you're facing right now, and how could I best support you?
Well, I think the way this thing started, I did diagnostic, right? So I came in and I came up with this idea. All right, you know what? I think I should try this law school idea. I've been a para for about 10 years now, and I think I've reached the highest I could get in the law firm, I work. Unless I want to be, a supervisor or an office manager, which I'm not interested in. I like interacting with clients. I like walking them through their documents so they can understand. And at the same time, do I want to do this forever? Not necessarily if I can actually be an attorney. So that's where I came up with this idea. And I took the diagnostic from scratch. I really, did not look into, hey, what do I need to study or whatever. I just took it straight on. And eventually now I got to interact with other attorneys and paralegals and pre-law students who are actually preparing for the LSAT. So I got to understand, hey, all the sections I went through, they kind of like serve a purpose. Then you have the logic game, then you have the reading comprehension, and you have all of these. And it's, of course, anybody on YouTube or anybody in real life will tell you it's not like, trying to go to med school or whatever. You're not coming in like you know it all. It's more like you got to practice this thing. So now I kind of started to understand the whole concept with the logic game. Hey, you read the questions, pen and paper. Hey, all right, do your diagram. So I kind of now understand, hey, now if I had done it differently, figure out, okay, I had to study practice for the logic game. I had to practice for reading comp and everything else. Then I'm sure I would have been taking the test differently versus, hey, I'm just answering the question. If I don't know, I'm just guessing. And so now I kind of like I have a better understanding on what I'm doing and how to study for it. And I think at this point it's more like, hey, I can read as many books as I want or anything I find online or listen to as many videos, but there are things that that I don't. You know what I mean? Besides you taking the test, but you teaching it, hey, you know what? If you come up with these kind of questions, this is how you answer them. The if and all and but and all these things didn't really mean anything to me prior to, well, they meant something, but within the text context, it really was, well, I'm reading it. Okay, all right, I'm answering. Oh, it should be D, should be B, should be C. But I think now, there are things that that I don't. So I figured, you know what? And I think in not YouTube, Instagram, in one of your Instagram video, I think you had mentioned something about, well, how bad do you want it? Is it worth investing in? As much as I was like, hey, you know what? I can figure it out. It's not that difficult. I can just read, get a book or whatever. But I'm like, hey, yeah, I could manage to get a 150 or 155 or 160, but anything further than that, I may need somebody who knows what this thing is about, how to actually move from 155 to 165 or from 150 to 170, things like that. So that's kind of like the idea in the back of my head when I decided to sign up, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I'm hearing from you, Stan, is that you're highly committed and you found that you were at a point where you were looking for additional support beyond what you can get simply out of a book or a video, because those are static. They're not going to respond to you. But a live classroom setting can be dynamic. You can have interaction, you can have back and forth, and you get the chance to ask your questions. So I'm glad you're here.
And then, of course, I got onto what you call this thing, Clubhouse.
Yeah.
So there's this whole networking with lawyers group and whatever, and you get to interact with people. And then that's how I started to interact with like other pre-law students and paralegals or whatever, whoever studied for LSAT. So we kind of like came about creating our own room in Clubhouse. And then we realized, hey, we can talk about this thing, but I think it's better if we get on Zoom so we can actually share our board, and, things like that. So I started interacting with a few folks where, every other day we get on a Zoom and then we exchange ideas and and I think the fact that the way I understand it may not be the way somebody else understands it, or I may not understand something, but hearing somebody who's trying just like me and how they understood the concept and how it made sense to them and how they explain it, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. It clicks, so I'm there. And I think, with the fact that we all pretty much stuck home most days, it would make sense for me to actually allocate enough time, whether mainly in the evening or on the weekend, to go over ideas and even, understand the concept and practice, because really that's what it comes to. Hey, you read the question and it becomes second nature. And then I think you also mentioned that if you maximize and you get everything right in logic game, you can afford to have 2 or 3 wrongs in another section, because having 100% there can actually push you further versus, well, having less right and less right everywhere else. So the more you get right, and then the better it gets for you with your score. So I'm like, hey, why not? He knows what he's talking about.
There's so much you said that I'd love to unpack, Stan. I mean, one thing you said about Clubhouse, and I've spent some time on Clubhouse and played around there as well. I love it for connection and for interactivity, but as you said, there's no visual component there. So there are certain conveniences to that if you're in a setting where you can't be on camera. But at the same time, for drawing logic games, for example, you want to have a whiteboard. And there's also a certain element to seeing people's facial expressions and body language, right? I mean, like, I love podcasts. I have a daily podcast. This will be a podcast. But there's been so much nonverbal communication just in terms of facial expressions in a conversation that are incredibly important to really see, is somebody getting it? Is it sticking? Do we need to go another direction to thoroughly cover this topic, whatever we're talking about? So I get what you're saying. The Zoom meetings are so much better, and you can use Zoom for study groups, which is fantastic. We have organized study groups in the course as well, actually. And so I definitely encourage you to attend, since you've already been getting value out of that. And then, of course, we have the live classes as well, different nights covering logic games, logical reasoning, reading comprehension, admissions, and of course, the group coaching mastermind. Now, you mentioned games. I do recommend aiming for perfection on games. I recommend aiming for perfection on everything, of course. I recommend aiming for 180, aiming for the top score, aiming to understand everything thoroughly. But when we look at what the typical 170 score looks like, it is, as I said, typically perfect or maybe -1 on games. Then you have more ambiguities of language on the other sections, which can lead to a few more points getting lost there. And that's really an area where I'd recommend reviewing if you're struggling there. And we do that in the course as well, using the Socratic review method.
I'm taking a big shot at this. You know what I mean? It's like, hey, law school wasn't part of the plan. You know what I mean? It wasn't part of the plan at all. But you get to enjoy what you're doing, and then you see how it makes a difference in people's lives. I mean, oftentimes I joke and say, well, you hear other paras saying, yeah, they're dealing with like family law client, everybody's upset, under pressure. And I'm like, well, I deal with them people. So they're not coming back, saying, hey, you robbed me or this or cussing me out. They're already there. It's all about figure out where the assets are and do the distribution. So that's my thing. But over time, and as I understood, hey, you know what? I can actually make a difference a bit further beyond just dealing with client. I mean, I work in Midtown, so 90% or 90, I guess I would say probably 98% of the clients that I deal with are not Black people or Latinos or anything like that. I probably, in the past 4 years, at this firm, I probably had two Black clients, and those were people with, those high-end clients, you know what I mean, where they need like big estate planning type of thing. So down the line, when you look at things, like, hey, you know what, how can we make a difference with the everyday folks? Because at the end of the day, they are left to fight over money, and it may not be a lot of money, but structuring the whole thing, organizing this thing as to who's getting what, makes everything better. And whoever passes away, they leave some form of, I guess, cohesion between everybody, versus like mommy died and nobody gets along because everybody feel that, hey, they should have got this, they should have got 50%. That one doesn't want this person to be the administrator or the executor. That one feel like, hey, they're the administrator, so anyway, they want their commission, things like that. So if I can make a difference at that level, with holding people's hand beyond being a para, see, why not?
Absolutely.
I mean, I still have to eat, but they still have a car, they still have a house. Sometimes they just, you do have folks where they have the house, but then somehow they manage to sign a reverse mortgage. And then it's like, now, they died. So now how do you deal with the reverse mortgage? You thought, okay, that's grandma's house, it's going to us, but somebody talked them into getting the reverse mortgage. So now you're really getting the house, So being able to inform the regular folks as to, hey, this is how the system works, this is how, you do it. I may not be able to reach everybody, but within like New York City itself, some folks do need help with that. And truthfully, when somebody come in where I work to get estate planning done, we're talking about $3,000 to $5,000, if not more. But, if the average Joe can get a basic will for $250, that makes or less, that makes a big difference.
There are so many things I love about your story, Stan, and the reasons why you want to go to law school. And I want to ask you, have you thought about including this in your law school personal statement or another part of your application?
You know what? I didn't even think about that.
What you just said right there, I want you to re-listen to what you just said later when I post this, because you could just take that, transcribe it, and you've got a rough draft right there.
Seriously, I did think about, hey, how do I, hey, they're talking about the statement and this and that. I did think about it, and I thought about maybe, I could just write about, hey, you know what, I came here, I spoke, French and this and that, so my English was decent, but, any little French kid, their idea is like, hey, you know what, we coming to America to get this MBA and things like that. That's the whole dream, the American dream or whatever. So that's kind of like what I was thinking about. But then you mentioning that, and I was like, wait, but yeah, you're absolutely right. That's really, the idea behind it. Yeah, back then when I came, the whole dream, 20 years ago or so, the idea was, hey, having an MBA and going back to France was like the thing to do. You were guaranteed, a top company and whatever else. But over time, you make other decisions and you try different things. It's like, hey, thank you.
No, for sure. I mean, listen, you can cover both stories. Your immigration story is a clear winner for a diversity statement. And so you could tell both stories, and you should. And I've laid them out as one being better for a personal statement, one being better for a diversity statement, but you could potentially flip them. I would say take whichever is likely to be longer and make that your personal statement, because typically you have more space for that. But regardless, I want you to cover both of these stories in your essays, because they're great stories to tell, and law schools are going to love them, in part because you'll definitely bring diversity to the classroom given your background. And at the same time, you have very compelling reasons for wanting to go to law school. It's a clear next step for you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm glad I spoke with you.
I'm glad I spoke with you as well.
I probably would have Googled, all right, personal statement and this diversity, and see what somebody else wrote. I'm like, okay, that's what they're saying. Maybe I should say this or that. That's probably what I would have done. But I'm glad I spoke with you, honestly. And that's why I said, hey, you know what? I may be able to figure it out and get it there, but speaking with people who knows and who have done it, then that probably would make a big difference. And in 2 minutes, it just make a big difference. And I'm like, hey, I'm ready to ride.
For sure. I mean, that's the funny thing about coaching is that a single insight can change everything for you.
Wow. Okay. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. Yeah, I'm all for it. I'm excited now. Like seriously, I'm actually excited.
Same. I'm excited to have you in the course. And one thing I want to mention actually is that we do application essay workshops in the course. And so whenever you have a draft or multiple drafts, you can just upload them and I'll add them to the agenda for an upcoming workshop.
Okay. Okay. Ooh, that's interesting. I'm there. I'm all for it. This is interesting. And I think what made a difference, and at first when I started, and I took the diagnostic and I read this thing, I was like, hey, you know what? It's a lot. Can I really do this thing? Like, I'm not like the study type person. I'm more hands-on. You know what I mean? When I deal with people, I turn this thing so they can understand. I can interact with folks and they understand. And they leave and they come back, they tell other people, other clients in their own companies, hey, they should go to our firms to get the information or get their estate planning done and things like that. So I was like, hey, you know what? It's kind of like a lot. But I think the moment I understood, hey, it's about practicing this thing, it's about understanding the concepts, I think it came where it clicked in a way where, hey, yeah, I can get a 160, I can get a 170. You know what I mean? Because it made sense to me that it wasn't just you read this thing and you answer the questions and then that was it. But understanding the process kind of like make me feel a little bit better and more, I guess, motivated to actually sit down and study versus, oh, I got to do this thing again. All right, how much I'm going to get this time, things like that. So I feel now I'm more motivated to study. And I'm not, one of those where, although everybody have their own mindset as to how long to study or whatever, I can't study for 6 months. You know what I mean? I have so many things going on where my schedule can shift at any time. My daughter is there, she's watching TV, but at the same time, even when I'm working from home, she wants the attention because she's there as well. You know what I mean? So it's like, I can just go deep hard and get this done and just move on. So I'm like, okay, let me put the effort. Let me invest a little bit into this thing and let's just see how it goes. And then, as I said, speaking with you and hearing the things that you were saying, and even with regard to listening to me and say, hey, you could put this thing in your statements. And it's like, hey, yeah, you're right. So I'm ready for this, and I can do this. I can do this.
You can do this. And I'm very excited to have you in the course. I'm glad that we had this conversation. Any other questions you might have or anything else you wanted to share before we wrap up?
The plan right now is just to go for April, and just so that way I can get my feet wet. And I'm not just going to go in and just get my feet wet to get them wet. I'm still going to go in and do my best. And if, I cling to a 165, 170, then great. Because, the way I'm looking at it is that I'm not trying to get into any like heavy Ivy League school in New York City or anything like that when CUNY is right there and it costs way less. And then at the end of the day, you get the same ESQ after your name. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, that's the, I've done CUNY, for my bachelor. So I'm comfortable with carry on with CUNY anyway. But if at the same time my score is so good that I can look at Pace or whoever else, I will. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely go for avoiding the debt, go for getting the maximal scholarship money. In so many cases, that's the best option.
Okay. So I'm all in. So what I'm going to do, of course, when we get off is just go back in because I was actually watching your intro and then number 1 and 2 is to see if there is anything tonight, for example, or even tomorrow and just jump on that and see how this thing can work for me.
Absolutely. Yeah, there are things tonight and tomorrow. Tonight we have my reading comp class and the group coaching mastermind call. And tomorrow is logic games and the study group. So I organize weekly study groups. You can just join that.
Okay,
as well.
no problem. I'll do just that.
Well, I'm really glad we connected, and I'll hope to see you in class tonight, Stan.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.